Welcome everyone. Great to see a number of staff here in the audience in Parramatta. Particular welcome to what I hope is a large group of colleagues watching this on the live stream. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting here in Parramatta, to acknowledge their elders past and present, and particularly to welcome anyone of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent who's in the room with us here in Parramatta or participating by live stream. Just to remind people who are both in the audience, of course, we'll get to a question and answer session a little later in the presentation, but those who are live streaming can also put questions through to me and we'll pick those up in the Q&A session a little bit later. But welcome, this is my mid-year address to staff. It's a regular feature of the program each year for me, so I'm glad to have an opportunity to talk to people. There are a number of things I want to cover in the session today. First of all, a number of strategic priorities for the university, and just to talk briefly about those. But what I'd like to spend most of the session in terms of providing a briefing to staff, most of the session devoted to a review of the My Voice staff engagement survey results, which will become available to all staff today at the high level that I'll discuss them, and we'll talk more about the findings from that survey a little bit later and what we'll be doing in response to it, both initially and during the course of the rest of this year and beyond. But I did want to, as I said, welcome everyone and thank you for joining with me today. The first set of priorities I'd like to talk about, apart from perhaps a brief comment about the higher education policy framework in Australia. Unfortunately, as I've said in a number of forums across the university in the last month, the federal government is not wavering on its intent to continue the funding freeze that they put in place, that Minister Birmingham put in place this year, to continue that funding freeze into 2019. And although the sector continues to advocate strongly in relation to that, I doubt we'll see any change. There is still an opportunity for the government to adjust that decision as late as the mid-year economic reforecast later this year, which is the timing of the announcement last year. So there's still an opportunity to have that revisited. I know that the chair of the Group of 8, Ian Jacobs from UNSW, is giving a National Press Club address in the near future, in which he'll be putting forward, I think, a number of very compelling arguments about the benefits, economic and otherwise, of Australia's universities, and particularly, in his case, the Group of 8 universities, to the Australian economy and the contribution to GDP and beyond. So I think there's going to be continuing across this year a number of opportunities for universities to advocate powerfully about the importance of investment in our university sector, but to date, the government and the minister have not wavered in that, in their intent to continue the funding freeze. We're, of course, planning for that contingency for 2019, and we're doing modelling in terms of student load in 2019. I did want to take this opportunity to thank everyone right across the organisation for the contribution to date this year. This has been a challenging year in a number of ways, but we've certainly been accommodating an additional 1,900 equivalent full-time students across the university, so a significant uplift in student load this year across all categories of student load, domestic, undergraduate and postgraduate, as well as international student load. So we're pleased about that. Of course, we're doing it in an environment with significantly restricted funding, and I do thank staff for the contribution you've made throughout this semester to what I think has been a very successful start to the year. One of the challenges, of course, that we've been facing in 2018, in the first half of this year, is the implementation of shared services after the enormous amount of work that went on during 2017 to get us ready for a very significantly changed shared services structure for the provision of professional services across the university to staff and students. Again, I thank staff for the work they've done as we implement shared services. I know it's not been easy. I know there have been some challenges, and I'll come back to some of those. I think the My Voice survey that I'll talk about a little later reflects some of those challenges. What I can assure you is that we are aware of those challenges. We will continue to work on rectifying them. We're undertaking, of course, the post-implementation review of shared services. It's been underway for the last few weeks, looking in some detail at a range of issues related to the shared services project. From the level of governance and leadership and management of the project, through issues of change management and how we've managed the change process, the way shared services was designed and delivered, at least in this initial phase, the benefits that have been realised and should be realised in the program, and of course both qualitative and quantitative information from surveys and other instruments that have been used to collect information. So we can, from that, the consultant, the independent external consultant that's been engaged to do the review will present a detailed report with a series of recommendations. I'm looking forward to that report, and I can assure everyone that the report will be released as soon as I receive it. So we look forward to staff across the university having a chance to review that, also to see the initial response from university management to the review itself, but also seeking your input into what the review is telling us and how we should respond to it. And then we'll continue a dialogue in relation to shared services over the course of this year and beyond. We're very committed to this process. It very much came out of the period of difficulty we experienced in 2016 and 2017 with lower than anticipated load and the reshaping of the university's staffing profile through our early voluntary retirement scheme at the end of 2016. Those changes needed to be responded to enable us to robustly deliver services consistently and of high quality across the organisation, and shared services is a very important part of that response. So we're very committed to it, but we're certainly willing to look at areas in which the implementation has fallen short of what we expected, certainly fall short of the standard we expect, and we will release that review and we will regularly follow up on its implementation of the recommendations that emerge from it. So I'm happy to take questions about shared services later if people have them, either online, sending them through, or in the audience. But I did want to, again, reiterate my thanks to all of you for your contribution around that project throughout this year, and of course, following up from the first phase of shared services in 2017. I wanted to talk a little bit about decadal planning, which is underway at the moment for the university. As you all know, we're situated in the fastest growing region in Australia, where we're seeing enormous amounts of investment by state and federal governments, particularly into the new airport at Badgerys Creek and all the transport infrastructure that goes along with that, but also a whole range of other related infrastructure investments. And that's bringing with it increased attention to the future of this region, and we are, of course, deeply interested in that future. We're now just 8 years from the first plane landing and taking off at Badgerys Creek. 8 years may seem like a long time. It's not. We have a state election next year, so 4 years beyond that we'll be very much within striking distance of the airport being fully operational. And there are many aspects to the implications of that new airport for Western Sydney University, and we should be considering those. So to consider them, we need to think beyond perhaps what would be a normal planning cycle for a university. We've just finished a mid-cycle review of our strategic plan, and again, I thank people for the contribution that they've made to that. That plan now, in its revised format that Sharon Bell's been working on, is now finalised, been approved by the Board of Trustees, and it's something that you should all, I hope, be downloading and spending some time reflecting on if you haven't already done that during the consultation processes. But that takes us through essentially to 2020. It's really a 3-year, 18, 19, 20 final stage of our current planning cycle. So then we enter into another potentially 5 or 6 year strategic planning cycle for the university. So we're already thinking out 8, 9, 10 years. So the concept of decadal planning is one that we're beginning to think through in some detail. And Sharon, again, who'll continue with us over the next couple of years, but Sharon will be involved in putting together a framework for decadal planning for the university in a range of areas, and to help us not only looking forward to 2028, but beyond that to 2038. And we had a Board of Trustees strategy day a little earlier this year, a few weeks ago, and that strategy day spent a considerable amount of time on decadal planning and what it would mean, what sort of university we need to be, looking ahead to 2038, what our aspirations are, consistent with our mission and our vision as an organisation, certainly not backing away from that mission, something that we're very passionate about, but how do we see ourselves out over a decade, or in fact over 2 decades? What does that mean to us? How should we prepare now? Are the projects that we're putting in place in 2018 and that we've begun over the last few years, are they going to position us well for that future? So that process is underway. I'm sure that there'll be detailed consultation about it, and particularly the way it will inform our next strategic plan. Academic restructure. I know that many of you will have been involved in the conversations that have been going on essentially for the last year or so around academic restructure. And I do thank those people who've contributed to that discussion. I think it's been an incredibly valuable one. I know there has been some concern expressed that the process is taking a long time. And I think the thought was that perhaps if there's already an idea in mind, perhaps in the Vice-Chancellor's mind, then perhaps it's time to get on with it. I wanted to reassure people that that's not the case. I wanted us to go through a detailed consultation process. I wanted this to be a very collegial activity. And I know Sharon Bell, again, who has been leading that, has been working very closely with colleagues and has identified a number of issues that we need to recognise in terms of the significance of those issues, in terms of academic governance, for example, within our schools, discipline, visibility within our schools, the number and type of schools that we need, and so on. The role of the professoriate that we've been working on, and I thank the professoriate for engaging so readily in the discussions that have gone on around the expectations we have of our professoriate and the role that they play. These are very, very important issues to work through, and to some extent they're important to resolve before we move to the macro considerations of academic structure. But we've been through that. The white paper that Sharon's put out, which I hope many of you have had a look at, begins to address the thinking we have and the recommendations that have emerged from that around the next phase of work that needs to be undertaken. A lot of that will accelerate over the next few months, so it'll be a fairly rapid process as we approach the end of this year. I have every intention of introducing a new structure in 2020. The detail of that, of course, is something that will emerge during this next phase of discussion and consultation, and the review paper I do recommend to you. Please download it, read it, respond to it, both at school level and more generally. I think it's going to be an important process and an intense one over the next few months. And I think very relevant again to this issue of the amount of change going on in the university at the moment, and has been effectively for the last 3 years. And I think when we come to look at the My Voice survey results, you get a sense of the impact that change process is having on all of you, on our colleagues right across the organisation, both academic and professional staff. And again, I thank you for contributing so fully to so many of these important projects. So as I said, that project, academic restructure, will be intense over the next few months. We will be piloting a number of things next year which have emerged from it, particularly in relation to the role of DAPS within our structure, academic governance responsibilities more broadly, the role of the professoriate and how that impacts on our structures. All of that will be, in a sense, piloted during next year. And we will have a structure by the end of this year that we will be implementing next year, but the start date for a new structure will be 2020. So we have time, I think, to put into ensuring that we do have both adequate consultation and we get this right more broadly. The other major project I wanted to talk about was Western Growth. Western Growth, of course, for those who are perhaps not as familiar with the detail of Western Growth as a project, it's actually a suite of projects underway that is redeveloping our campus network. When we think about the changes in our campus network in recent years, the development of One Parramatta Square being an example of that, the Peter Shergold building, the move of the School of Law into that building, the way in which we have infused technology in that building, the new collaborative learning spaces that we've developed and so on. It's an example of responding, I think, very strongly to positioning the university at the heart of Sydney, Greater Sydney, and ensuring that we're well placed to meet the needs of our students, consistent with our mission well into the future. But we've also done a lot more than that. Going back some years, this university decided to redevelop its Campbelltown campus in terms of a residential estate. We're now well advanced with the first 5 stages of that development, and we'll be moving into the final stage, stage 6, later this year. So that's a major project designed to provide the university, in a one-off sense because we're selling land, but to provide the university with substantial funds to invest in our corpus, in our endowment. Of course, you'll know that we've made major changes at Westmead, where we no longer operate on Westmead in terms of a teaching campus. I know that Nickham have moved a substantial part of their operation from Campbelltown to Westmead into the recently refurbished Building J, the historic building at Westmead, and I thank Alan Ben-Susan and the team at Nickham for the change to that environment. We're now moving into the next phase of refurbishment of that building to put in wet labs so that Nickham, by the middle of next year, will be fully relocated from Campbelltown to Westmead, to be in what is one of the largest health precincts in the Southern Hemisphere, and one where the government's investing substantial resources. We've also indicated the move of Marks from Milpera to our new buildings that will go up at Westmead in the next few years. So Westmead will become, again, a major part of the university's campus redevelopment. We have our Sydney Olympic Park campus that we opened for the college after we closed down the operations at Westmead. We've opened our new facilities with Navitas in Sydney City and the Sydney City campus, where we offer our programs jointly with Navitas. We're undergoing significant change. And of course, we're planning changes at Warrington South and Warrington North as part of consolidation at Kingswood. So right across our network, change is underway. Liverpool. I want to thank the people who've been involved in the Division of Finance and Resources, and particularly the Schools of Nursing and Midwifery and Social Sciences and Psychology, for, of course, our Liverpool campus, which we opened a few weeks ago, and Scott Morrison, the Treasurer, was good enough to open that campus for us. And that was deliberate. We wanted the Treasurer to know what we're doing in Western Sydney, and importantly, what's at risk if, in fact, the government continues with a funding freeze through 2019 and 2020. And now, of course, we're in the process of planning for our new Bankstown CBD campus. And again, an exciting new development for us in the heart of that city centre as part of a precinct development in Bankstown. So all of these projects are part of Western Growth, designed for many reasons, partly to ensure that we're future-proofing the university in the context of all the change going on in Western Sydney that I've alluded to, and there's a huge amount of it. There is a great deal of interest in Western Sydney from other institutions, other universities, both Australian, both New South Wales, Australian more broadly, and international. We need to be able to respond to that competition. This is very much our heartland, and we need to ensure that we meet the needs of our heartland. We need to ensure that we can meet our mission as a university providing access and participation in this region, particularly to students from low SES backgrounds, so students with an educationally disadvantaged background. This has been our mission. This has been the way in which we engage with our region since our beginnings and before. And we need to ensure that in the future we can continue to do that as our region changes. So in that context, Western Growth is a very, very important part of reshaping the university's campus network. Equally, it's an opportunity to ensure that we can generate resources for the future. So Western Growth is also about putting in place a sizable endowment, excuse me, a sizable endowment for this university, largely established in the next 5 to 10 years, but for many years to come, to provide us with resources to supplement and in fact to make us less dependent on Commonwealth funding for what we're doing. We still remain the most highly dependent university in the country on Commonwealth funding, and that puts us at risk when the Commonwealth does things like funding freezes and other things. We need to become less dependent, and we're doing a number of things about that. Western growth is an important part of it, and we have ambitions to grow our corpus substantially, hundreds of millions of dollars of additional resources available to be invested, and the return on those investments to be directed to teaching and research. And it's not just that. We want to grow our international student numbers over the next few years. We're sitting at 14% now. We need to grow, we think, to about 20% of our load, well below the national average, I might say, but we're a multicultural region, and I think it reflects quite a reasonable and appropriate aspiration for us to grow to 20% of our load, particularly with the government putting downward pressure on domestic student numbers in the region. And we need to grow our postgraduate coursework, fee-paying load. Those are things that we're working on right across the university, all of our schools and the senior executive. So Western growth is a very, very important part of that, and I wanted to recognise it and to thank the teams that are involved. I also wanted to spend a little bit of time on Respect Now Always. We're coming up to the anniversary of the report by the Australian Human Rights Commission on sexual assault and sexual harassment in Australia's universities. A landmark report, 30,000 students involved in that survey, the largest of its kind anywhere in the world, and not only the largest of its kind, but the only survey of its kind in the world to be supported by the entire sector. In this case, every Australian university, private and public, supporting that under the auspices of Universities Australia. That was a challenging report in many, many ways, and presented, I think, a stark view of the extent of sexual harassment and sexual assault on Australian university campuses. We're now almost 1 year. We're coming up to the anniversary in August of the announcement of that report and its public launch by the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, and the team at the AHRC and UA, with the support of the NTU and the National Union of Students, NUS. And a lot has been happening, and I'm very, very pleased about what we've been doing to respond to the recommendations, every single recommendation from the AHRC report, as well as, of course, other reports. CAPA, the Council of Australian Postgraduate Associations, and others put out reports, and we're looking at all of the recommendations from those various reports and ensuring that we're responding to all of them. One very important part of that response has been to form an RNA task force, which I chair, which has representation largely from students and staff of the university, but I'm very pleased that there are a large number of students involved from right across the university, as well as a number of external agencies that are involved in supporting and assisting those who are in fact the victims of sexual assault or sexual harassment more generally. On the slide, which people can see here and hope you can see on live stream, you get a sense of the sorts of things that we've been doing. Student ambassador programs to continue to get the message out about respectful relationships and about awareness raising of response to and how the university, in fact, responds to matters of sexual violence or sexual harassment. Training and awareness programs for first responders, for student ambassadors, for key staff, and so on, something that we want to expand, and particularly around respectful relationships and consent training. And a lot of other universities are doing similar things, and we're working in conjunction with those universities through UA. Improving reporting and counselling services, resources so that we can raise awareness of what is available to anyone who has either witnessed sexual assault or sexual harassment, or is the victim of sexual assault or a survivor from sexual assault and sexual harassment. And of course, our commitment to continually review and update what we're doing. I've also been very pleased in sharing the task force that we have studied a number of cases of reports of sexual assault and sexual harassment at the university, and we've been looking at how we can ensure that we can do things better in the future. And that's been, I think, a very strong example of how we are responding to what might be some very difficult historic cases that weren't handled well by this university and others in other universities, and ensuring that our policies and procedures are much better in future. And there's an independent review going on to our policies and procedures as a result of that. So I did want to thank the team that is working on RNA, but I also wanted to take this opportunity to encourage all staff to be aware of what's happening under the Respect Now Always banner across the university. Please find the time to have a look at the training modules, the new RNA app that's going to be launched, the online portal that's going to be available. It'll give you a real sense of the materials that are being produced and the difference we hope they will make. And I think the more of us that are aware, the better we will be. We're moving more and more towards mandatory training as well for many of our students. Now, what I'd like to do for the rest of my presentation today, there are many other projects, by the way, that are underway, not the least of which I should mention is the solar car. I see Simeon in the audience, and those of you following the solar car on Yammer, it was quite an extraordinary first day. They started 40 minutes late and ended up second by the end of the day. Were lapping, I'm going to say Stanford, MIT, and others left in their wake. But the solar car Unlimited 2.0, the updated version of the one that did so well in the Darwin to Adelaide Solar Challenge just last year. It's wonderful that we're supporting them in the United States. I think they're doing 2 major solar car challenges in the US, and I think it demonstrates the quality of our students. It's a great project. It's one that I think they will remember for the rest of their lives, those who are involved in it. But there are many, many examples of that underway in the university at the moment, and I certainly, when I see them on Yammer, I'm incredibly impressed with the scope and the scale of what's going on in our university. Of course, it's incredibly important in that context that we, from time to time, reflect on the culture of our organisation, that we reflect on the extent to which we are engaged individually and collectively in the mission and the vision of our university. So the My Voice survey of staff engagement is something we've now done 3 times. We've done it in 2012, 2015 and 2018. And what I'll do in the next few minutes is to give you a high-level summary of what's come out of the 2018 report. It'll highlight comparison with 2015, so we see how we fared against 2015. It'll show some comparison with benchmark universities in the sector. Remember, there's about, I think, 39 universities in Australia and New Zealand who undertake this survey. Not all universities in Australia use this particular instrument, but across Australia and New Zealand, the vast majority do, 39 universities. 5 of the IRU universities are involved. So that's the group we joined last year, the Innovative Research Universities Group. James Cook, Griffith, ourselves, La Trobe, Flinders, Murdoch and Charles Darwin are the universities that are involved in the survey, and 5 of them, including ourselves, have completed. So you'll see in the data, and particularly when you download the data, be made available today. So you'll be able to download it and have a look at it in detail and participate in the next phase of response to it. But you'll see the comparison with IRU and Australia and New Zealand. I want to reassure people, because I know from time to time during the survey phase itself, concerns were raised about, is this confidential? Is this truly confidential? Well, I can assure you it is. The data is held by the My Voice company. We never see any individual data, nor would we want to, nor should we. We have no access to it. We receive summary information from My Voice in the format that you're going to see in a moment. So I want to reassure people that it is completely confidential. There are 2 parts to the survey, a quantitative aspect in terms of satisfaction levels, which we'll talk about in a moment, and also a qualitative aspect where there's been free text responses, which I think amounted to almost 500 pages of literally of comments from people. And those comments, where they don't refer to an individual, and there are a few of those which can't be released, but the vast majority of those will be released for people to review. And you get a sense of the contribution that colleagues have made to those open-ended questions. So let's just have a look at a little bit of the background before I jump into the survey results. 143 questions of that strongly disagree to strongly agree format. For the main survey, we did a casual sessional staff survey, one of the few universities to do this, but we thought it was timely to also reach out to our casual and sessional staff in relation to their engagement with the university and the culture of the university and their passion for the university. So we've done that. Because of the nature of casual and academic staff, there were fewer questions, but I'll come back to the survey results in a moment. A number of open-ended questions. I'll show you some of the results from those. Demographic questions, so we can split the data in a variety of ways. It's provided to us from the My Voice team in a variety of ways. The response rate was very high, 87%. We targeted 90%. 87% is very, very good because these were complete surveys. Last time I think we hit 86%, but that included a number of surveys that were only partially completed. So this is an outstanding result. There's another 4% above the 87% that were partially completed, but they can't be used in the overall survey result because of the fact they're only partly completed. But there are 87% of staff completed the survey, so the margin of error is very low, as you would expect. It was much more difficult to engage broadly with our casual and sessional staff. We were targeting 30%, we got pretty close at 29%, and I think the figure was 344 colleagues, casual and sessional staff responded. The margin of error is slightly higher as a result. I wanted to put this slide up, not because you need to read this. A lot of what you see at the level I will present is more about trends or impressions than it is about the minutiae of the data. This is simply, again, to reinforce the fact that this was a very confidential survey. What you'll see here when you look at the data, this is the number of responses and the head count by area of the university. And what you'll notice is that some areas have well over 100% response rate. And the reason for that is that people chose which area to associate themselves with, and during the shared services implementation phase, of course, people have been moving in the organisation. Some people may have associated themselves with a school, whereas they're now associated with a division and so on. So we acknowledge those complexities in the survey. We acknowledge them. It does mean that in some ways it is harder to interpret some results, but overall it's a very high response rate, and we can certainly gauge from that, I think, some very important messages for the university. So this was really just to show you that it's quite complex, but nevertheless, hopefully you'll get a sense of the distribution. So the main results. Again, this is again an impression for you to get across a range of areas of the survey. So you get an impression here of yellow, green, and red. So red, of course, are where there are areas of the survey where the responses in terms of percentage favourable, that is agree or strongly agree statements, percentage favourable falls below 50%. Then there's the yellow, which is the moderate range, the 50 to 80% favourable. These are set and defined by the My Voice organisation. And then those above 80% favourable are in green. So you get a sense of that distribution, if you like, across those categories for the survey. And you'll see there are, and we'll come back to these areas, cross-unit cooperation, workload, entrepreneurship, career opportunities that appear in red, as does change and innovation. And I think we'll come back to that in a moment. And then, of course, you've got areas of green: mission, role clarity, diversity, safety, motivation and initiative, talent, teamwork, job satisfaction, supervision. There are some areas of green. Overall, I need to acknowledge at the outset that compared with 2015, as you'll see on the next slide. By the way, before I go to that, there are two particular overarching themes that this survey tries to report on. Those are themes of passion and progress. It clusters together indicators into passion and progress indicators. And passion is the level of engagement of staff with the organisation, their passion literally about the organisation, about the university. And progress, of course, reflecting the direction the institution's taking, the change that's underway. Passion and progress dropped slightly on this survey compared to last, passion less so. People are still passionate and high 70% around passion, which is great to see. It's down a little bit on the 2015 survey. Progress down more significantly, about 9 percentage points to the high 50s from being in the high 60s. So you can see a shift in that regard overall. The next, and again, this is for visual rather than detailed analysis. These are the category results. And for those who would struggle to see anything up there, there is, of course, the first column is the percentage not applicable, but then the first column of colour is, of course, the 2018 results. These results classified according to high, moderate or low, so green, yellow and red. And then the percentage difference with 2015. And it's hard to read, I think, but I can give you the overall impression. There has been a significant downward shift in levels of satisfaction, percentage favourable responses in many of those indicators between 2015 and 2018. And we'll come back to look at the detail of that. In the moderate range, but nevertheless, there's been a decline. Then you've got literally the diagrammatic representation of that. Then there are 3 columns which show differences with the benchmark universities in Australia and New Zealand, with the IRU, and with all industries, which, to be fair, I don't think we should bother too much about because it includes a lot of industries very different to higher education. So we tend to focus on the higher education benchmark in Australia and New Zealand and the IRU. What I can tell you about those two, broadly, we sit a little bit above the sector average across the board. Some indicators lower, more above the sector average, although we've come down a lot closer to the sector average between 2015 and 2018. And with the IRU, generally across the board, much stronger results here than we see in the IRU. Again, this is just high-level impressions, and I'll come back to some of the key messages in a moment. One of the pieces of analysis that the My Voice organisation does is to produce some priorities. And this is a priority matrix. It's in, as you can see, 4 quadrants that map performance and impact. And performance is a combination of the percentage favourable response and industry benchmarks. So how have we done against our industry, in this case higher education, and the percentage favourable. And of course impact, which relates to the degree that each of these indicators impacts on passion or progress. So some indicators are more highly correlated with passion or progress. So they identify those areas which are low performing, so we're not doing well against our benchmarks or percentage favourable, and where they are high impact. That is, they're areas where if we made change, we should influence passion and progress indicators for the organisation. So you can see there's a cluster of them. I won't go through all of them, but in that red half quadrant at the bottom are executive leadership, staff survey. Staff survey results, the staff survey category reflects a concern by staff that there was not enough done between the 2015 and the 2018 survey in terms of responding to those messages from 2015. And then a number of others on the border, processes, research, involvement, teaching, and we can come back to why and which particular questions relate to those. But I'll be focusing around executive leadership, communication, and a range of other areas. Now, the historical results, this is just a comparison between 2012, 2015 and 2018 to show you how they looked. Again, it's just the visual interpretation. As I said, strong increase 2012 to 2015, and we've come back on many indicators in terms of percentage favourable. Still 75% of our indicators in 2018 are above the 2012 levels. But nevertheless, there's been a significant shift between 2015 and 2018, and that's what we'll focus on. Now, I want to go quickly through, what were very good and what was of deep concern. The top 5 questions in terms of percentage favourable, and I think these are important to reflect on. Teamwork, good working relationships with co-workers, diversity. In Western Sydney University, sex-based harassment is not tolerated. Role clarity, I understand my job and the contribution it makes. Diversity, my immediate supervisor manager genuinely supports equality between men and women, that was the question. Diversity, gender equality in the workplace is important. There are no comparators for that because we included a number of additional questions on diversity. So teamwork, diversity, role clarity, all showing very, very high levels favourable, as they were in the last survey. So what are the bottom 5? Change. Change was handled well at the university. Cross-unit cooperation. Good communication was the particular question in that regard. Change and innovation. The way the university is run has improved over the last year, has dropped significantly. 23 percentage points. Again, cross-unit cooperation, knowledge and information are shared throughout the university, has dropped. Not as much, but it's dropped. And it's one of the lowest level indicators. Entrepreneurship, I'm given enough time enough support to enable me to be entrepreneurial, is in fact up on the last survey, but remains low overall. The ones I think we need to focus on, at least I will in this presentation, are executive leadership and change. And communication more broadly. The top 5 questions compared to 2015. Yes, some things have gone up, and I think we should reflect on that. Facilities, particularly food and beverage on our campuses. We're one of the few universities in the sector that still has this question. It is always, across the board, a question with very low levels of percentage favourable. But we wanted to maintain this in the survey and see what we could do, and I congratulate the team that we've at least moved it 13 percentage points upwards. Community engagement, pleasingly, up 6 percentage points. Entrepreneurship, even though it's one of the lowest overall categories in terms of percentage favourable, actually went up this time compared to last. Supervision and safety, I wanted to comment on, have both moved in a positive sense. Supervision, I have confidence in the ability of my supervisor, moved into the green. I think that's an important endorsement at the local level of the strong support our colleagues have for their immediate supervisor. However you define that across the board, both for academic and professional staff. And safety. Staff are aware of their work health and safety responsibilities, so important to us, and again has moved up since the last survey. The bottom 5, compared to 2015, where we've moved the most dramatically. Change in innovation, processes, teaching, in particular about evaluating teaching effectively. Change is handled well, and the university is innovative. Very significant movement in percentage favourable. The first question again, the way the university is run has improved over the last year, down 23 percentage points and down 8 against the sector average. Again, picking up these issues of executive leadership, communication and change. Compared to benchmarks, again, the top 5 questions where we're up significantly against other Australian and New Zealand universities. Facilities, facilities, facilities. There is a much greater sense within our university of the quality of the facilities we have than our colleagues across Australia and New Zealand. And that's grown dramatically, and I think we recognise that, all of us who move around our campuses, to recognise the quality of our facilities. Performance appraisal, again, is up significantly on our colleagues in the sector. Motivation and initiative, again, significantly up in relation to the sector. But at the bottom end of that spectrum, compared to benchmarks, teaching, and this is a particular question about having enough support to evaluate my teaching effectively. And I know that Simon and Denise will be looking into this with colleagues to better understand the concerns here. That is certainly down compared to the benchmark by 9 percentage points. Again, change and innovation is down against the benchmark. Teaching on a number of other categories, but less dramatically against 2015, but down against the sector average. And processes. The processes in particular in this case, and I think this would resonate during our implementation of shared services in Western Sydney University, it's clear who has responsibility for what. And that's down 6 percentage points against the sector, but down 14 compared to 2015. Before I come back to the teasing out the messages in more detail, I just want to show you a couple of other graphs. Again, to look at only in terms of the shape of the distribution, if you like, of colour. These are heat maps, weather maps as they're called. Across each column represents a different part of the university. So moving left to right, we're dealing with divisions and then schools. So divisions in a sense on one half, schools on the other. And of course the overall results is the first column. And I think what you can see very clearly, a pattern here. The overall levels of percentage favourable, levels of satisfaction, if you like, are much higher in our divisions than they are in our schools. And you can read this both in that very high-level way, or you can read it vertically and look at particular schools or particular divisions, or you can read it horizontally in relation to particular items. And when you see it and download it, you can look at those in some detail. And I'll come back to more of the detail that will be available. But there's a very clear pattern here, and I'll explain more about how you can interpret that. This is the change weather map. So this tells us the heat of those areas that have changed most significantly since 2015. And again, the same pattern is evident. Much higher levels of change in our schools than in our divisions across the board. Again, this is clear. Again, you can read it in a variety of ways. Some schools vertically redder than other schools, and divisions in similar ways. These maps are available at school and division level, and where there are enough respondents at a sub-level. So I see a lot of heads on an angle here as people endeavour to look for either their school or division to get a sense of that. This is all available today, so you can download it and have a look at it in your various groups or individually. So that's for the university survey overall. And I'll come back to the key messages. I want to touch for a moment on our casual and sessional staff survey. I should have said at the outset that thank you to the Office of Human Resources, to Kay and the team that worked on this, that encouraged people to become involved in the survey throughout the period it was open, and including that period where we extended it to try and ensure we got as many responses as we could, and encourage both our academic and professional staff within the university, but importantly our casual staff to respond. I should have said that at the outset. Again, there are fewer questions and not a lot of benchmarking because we're beginning this process. This is the overall performance review, mostly yellow. Grievance handling is green. Career opportunities is red, unfortunately, not surprisingly, given the often precarious nature of employment for casual and sessional staff. The two big indicators, passion and progress, very similar for our casual and sessional staff as it is for the university overall. High 70s for passion and high 50s for progress. Now, in terms of the category results, again, just to show you the shape of the distribution, mostly moderate, as I said, green for grievance handling and Career opportunities very low, 29% favourable in that regard, but it gives you a sense of the distribution. In terms of the priority matrix, workload and well-being, the indicators that fall into the priority section, in a sense, if we were to look for those areas we want to particularly focus on, it would be in those areas. And quickly on the top favourable and the top and the bottom favourable. The top favourable, passion at 97%. I like the kind of work I do amongst our casual and sessional staff. Again, this is approximately 350 of our staff. Diversity, fairness and equity, grievance handling, diversity, fairness and equity. Again, this is in relation to not tolerating sex-based harassment at the university, and adequate resources. So those were the percentage favourables. Those bottom 5 in terms of percentage favourable, career opportunities very low. I think this reflects something across the sector in terms of casualisation and as I said, the precarious nature of employment for many of our sessional staff. Career opportunities, induction, which is not only down here for us in terms of 43% only in terms of percentage favourable, but against the benchmark. There are a few universities, very few, that undertake this survey. Career opportunities, again, confidence in the future, job opportunities, and processes and paperwork, although it's high against the sector. The weather map, again, this heat map of our casuals and the schools that they're in. So again, to be looked at in terms of, schools where there were enough responses to give a result. So for example, for the School of Medicine, there were not enough respondents, so there is no result for them. They fell short of the minimum required, and that is to ensure that individual responses could not be identified. But otherwise, you can see the distribution there by school. And again, get a sense of that distribution compared, for example, with what we saw for the university overall, excluding this group. They weren't included in the other survey. What I'd like to go on to now, before getting to what do we extract from this in terms of our priorities and what are the key messages, which I want to spend a few minutes on. The text responses. I mentioned there are 500 pages of text responses, and you can have a look at those when they go up very soon. And some of them are very detailed responses to questions like the 3 greatest strengths of the university and what they were, or the greatest challenges. These were just, in a sense, a summary by the My Voice team, not by us, by My Voice, of the areas that those responses, in terms of the strengths of the university, what are the areas that would these responses could be classified in? So talent, student focus, learning and support, location, motivation, organisational objectives, mission, change, community engagement, teamwork, diversity. But of course there are many, many variations. They're broadly classified, but there are many variations within it. That's a high-level assessment of it. If I look at the next survey, the next question, which was, or one of the other questions, 3 ways the university could be improved. Again, there are a lot of comments made by people and we appreciate it. I think this was the biggest section in terms of text-based responses. Sorry? By far. So many people are taking time to make comment. And here's how they're classified. Processes, leadership, cross-unit cooperation, probably related to communication, student focus, organisational direction, resources, rewards and recognition, facilities, involvement, wellness and workload. That's just the classification. And we'll do more work on that as we unpack those, and you can see them for yourselves. So at a high level, very high level, that's a summary of the My Voice results for 2018. I want to try and, if I can, at the highest level, summarise those a little bit more for you in terms of, at the very highest level, the key messages. I will emphasise, though, that every division and those sub-areas within divisions which have sufficient responses for an individual survey will see their individual results. as will all the schools, and that gives an opportunity. In some cases, schools by campus, so where we can get sufficient respondents above the threshold. And schools and divisions and areas will need to develop their own responses to their own priorities. There'll be a process that is undertaken from here to address those issues. So I'm only looking at the very high level, but there are some very, very important messages here, and I take responsibility for those as the Vice-Chancellor. Executive leadership. There is certainly a concern about the extent to which the executive leadership of the university is operating as strongly as this organisation needs it to, as this university needs it to, and in the context of the change that's underway. There's a very clear message of needing to rebuild confidence in the executive leadership of the university. Change and innovation, primarily change when you look at the particular questions that contribute here, but very significant concerns about the scale, the scope, the depth, the extent, the timing of the change underway inside the organisation. Very much, I think, a concern about the change that's underway and concern about whether or not it is actually reinforcing the direction of the university. Better understanding the relationship between the changes that are affecting each and every one of us so deeply and whether or not those changes are in fact consistent with our mission, our vision, our values as an organisation. Processes. Again, if you tease out the questions, they're very much about processes related to change. Communication. This is a perennial issue for a large organisation. I don't deny that. I acknowledge that we've made some progress in trying to improve communication across the university, but clearly not enough. And there's a very clear message that we need to improve the quality and the extent and the dialogue, the two-way nature of the communication that needs to go on in an organisation of our size, scale and complexity. At the very highest level, those are the four key themes that we need to address and that the senior executive group of the university will be working on. And I look forward to working with you in relation to those. Favourable responses and strong improvements. Let's recognise the positives as much as acknowledging the challenges. Teamwork, working relationships and job satisfaction continue to be very strong. Supervision, particularly this positive sense of support for and acknowledgement of someone's supervisor, however they interpret what that means, whether it's in the academic or the professional staff context, because it's strong across the board. Diversity. We included a whole range of additional questions on diversity and gender, and I must say I was pleased with the results, and I think we can all be pleased. There's much more to do, but there was a positive response. Safety, I said earlier about work health and safety. I'm glad that it improved on the last survey and continues to be very strong. Acknowledging the facilities. We need great facilities to be a great university, along with our great staff, and that comes through in the survey. Community engagement, and I'm pleased about the sense that across the board people are feeling that we are actually living up to the mission of the university to engage with Greater Western Sydney. More work to do, absolutely, and I know Lisa Jackson-Pulver and Scott Holmes will be working on that as part of our community engagement strategy, but nevertheless, that was encouraging. Another high-level summary that I've already said, but a significant decline in results since 2015, but still largely above, 75% of them, above the 2012 levels, and largely in line with the sector. But that is, I think, small comfort given the particular issues I've highlighted. In the casual and sessional staff survey, we'll need to spend more time on that. At the moment, generally fairly positive, except for those obvious and deep areas of concern around career opportunities, casualisation, induction and training, and there's more that we'll certainly do there. And there are some things in the new enterprise agreement which touch on matters to do with career opportunities, but I do acknowledge more work to be done. So they're the key findings. There are some other findings if you drill down a little more on the data, which I wanted to highlight to everyone. I've only given this at the high level with professional and professional and academic staff in fact combined, but you can split it out. It was about 45% academic, or 40 to 45% academic, 55 to 60%, I haven't got the exact figure, professional staff. So there's a significant group of both professional and academic staff involved. One thing that's very clear when you look at it comparing professional staff to academic staff, the academic staff percentage favourable levels are significantly lower than professional staff. And we could talk about how we might interpret that, but it's a very clear message of having to reach out and engage with our academic staff, not to exclude professional staff by any means, but particularly to engage with our academic colleagues across the university. There are some other trends which are noteworthy. Staff who have arrived in recent times, over the last 2 to 5 years of service, are generally speaking much more satisfied than others, so those who have been appointed relatively recently. Young staff, which I think is slightly different to what we saw in the 2015 result, the 2018 result, higher levels of satisfaction amongst staff less than 30 years of age, and we do have quite a cohort of staff in that category. Campuses, higher levels of dissatisfaction at Milperra and Campbelltown compared to other campuses, so there is a campus-based analysis that we can do. As we saw in the last survey, when you look at the analysis of academic staff, level B, C, and to a certain extent D, but certainly B and C level staff, our lecturers and senior lecturers, are finding things much more challenging than newer staff at level A and level E, and to a certain extent D. So there is that same behaviour we noted in the 2015 survey, and to some extent that's fed into the work that's going on at the moment around academic governance, around the role of DAPS and course advisors and so on in the work that's going on as a precursor to restructure. We're concerned around staff with a disability and staff with a work-related adjustment for a disability. This is something we'll work with those staff. There were higher levels of concern expressed there than in the overall survey itself. And there is a small number of staff who didn't identify gender with relatively high levels of dissatisfaction. I think it's about 40 or 50 staff overall in the institution, and we recognise that and we'll do what we can to explore that further. So, I think from the very high level there are some clear messages, and I hope I've conveyed those to you. I take responsibility for it, as I do for what we're going to try and do about it, and to assure you that we will work very diligently, and by we I'm certainly referring here to my colleagues on the senior executive group, but also more broadly in the executive team of the university in how we might engage in this. Areas for action. These are actually largely identified by the My Voice survey itself, so they provide a sense of where they believe the actions need to occur. Leadership, as I've said, executive leadership in particular, there's a very clear proximity effect in the survey. The closer you are to your manager, the better the sense of support and reassurance you have from the support of that manager. The further away that person is, of course, the less confident people are in the leadership of the organisation. So that effect is very clear, and it's very clear that we need to strengthen confidence in the executive leadership team. Continued focus on two-way communication. I acknowledge that I've been working on Yammer, and I know many of you have, as just one tool in the armoury we need to have available to us to address enhanced communication. It certainly hasn't achieved what I would hope yet, but I'm prepared to persevere. I hope others will join me in persevering with that, but there's much more we need to do, and I'll come back to some steps in that regard in a moment. And of course, that's more consultation and engagement with our staff. Change management, of course, comes through very strongly. Improving key aspects of change management, planning, communication, implementation and review. We will learn a lot from the post-implementation review of shared services, which I have said will be released to people shortly, and our response to it thereafter. Ensuring changes address both organisational priorities and staff needs. As I said a moment ago, one of the communication issues we need to address is the connection between change and institutional direction, or the university's strategic direction. And we need to do more to engage with people about that connection and to listen to those many staff who have concerns about the change process and the effect or the extent to which it's in fact reinforcing our mission. Listening to and acting upon staff feedback, communicating resultant initiatives and impacts with staff. Processes again, refining processes and policies to be efficient and relevant, providing staff with adequate internal support and clarity around lines of responsibility. I acknowledge that certainly post-shared services we have elements that need to be addressed there. There are some teaching issues, and I'll leave it for individual areas and certainly for Denise and Simon to work on what we can draw from the comments that have come through on teaching. There are many positives, but there are some areas of concern. And of course, and importantly, wellness of our staff. Investigating concerns around workload and stress management. I must unfortunately say that this has been a problem in the previous two surveys. It's not peculiar to this one. That doesn't for a moment detract from the importance of it, but there's more we need to do there. And of course, what we can do more broadly to support the well-being of our staff. So the next steps. As I said, the results, largely as I put them up today, are available for download. People can have a look at them. The executive team got those results a few days ago, so they could have a chance to reflect on them. But I wanted the overall results kept till I could provide a summary to all of you. So those are now going to be available. The detailed results then at division and school level will also be released. So they'll be released to those schools and divisions. So people will be able to see the results that pertain to their area and particularly see those heat maps, those areas of concern, those priorities. They are not identical across every area. And you can see that from the heat map. There are some significant issues in some areas of the university that we need to work on more so than others. As there are some areas of the university where the results are overwhelmingly very positive. And they equally need to have a look at their results and see what they need to do to maintain those very positive results. I assure you I'll continue to give you regular updates in this format as one example, but in a range of other ways about how we go about implementing the changes we think are necessary to address these concerns. Post the 2012 survey, there were a range of initiatives put in place, working groups that worked across a whole range of areas identified in that survey. We didn't do that to the same extent following 2015. I think we need to return to a model that's much more intensive. But the HR office, Susan and her team, will continue to update people. And of course, our deans and heads of division will be very active in that way on a regular basis. I mentioned earlier the executive leadership concern. I acknowledge it. We need to do something about that and we can't afford to wait. So you will see all members of the senior executive team out in schools in particular over the next few months, engaging with staff, listening to many of the concerns you have, and also providing an opportunity to discuss some of these critical issues that have emerged from the survey. So there's a process that will go on for the remainder of this year and into next year in that regard, and be intensified thereafter. I mentioned the post-implementation review of shared services, and that will be released as soon as I receive it, as well as shortly after our view of how we respond to those concerns and recommendations, and there will be several, as you can imagine, in that review. And I'll equally be interested in comments from staff broadly in the institution. I'm aware that the academic restructure has taken longer, the conversation, than many people had anticipated, and that does lead to levels of anxiety because it's more change. So I think we need to accelerate that process without jeopardising consultation and the integrity of the way in which Sharon has gone about that. But nevertheless, we will need to bring that to a conclusion more quickly. and hold it to the schedule that we're on at the moment. And the other thing that I will assure you we will do, we've been on a 3-year cycle for these surveys, 12, 15, 18. I think given the nature of this survey, we should repeat this survey in 2 years rather than 3, and gauge the effectiveness of the strategies we put in place. So I'll be working with Susan's office to look at a 2020 repeat of the survey. We'll add other questions to the survey as we did this time to try and draw out more information. But again, it'll give us, I think, some very valuable insights. I'm a great believer in these forms of engagement surveys. As I said, not every Australian university is committed to these surveys. Some universities don't use them, or they may use other instruments. I think the My Voice survey has some challenges about it as an instrument, but it does give us broad benchmark capability, and I think it does highlight very clearly key areas for focus. So I can assure you that we will be following up. There'll be intense activity, and we look forward to everyone's contribution to that process and to what I hope will be improvement across the board for 2020, but improvement, more importantly, in the lives of each and every one of you, so valuable to our future and so valuable to the future we're mapping out for ourselves over the next decade and beyond. So with that, thank you, and I will go to questions here in the audience or online. So thank you. Right, so I'm not sure whether we have online questions, but I'm certainly happy to take them from the audience here. And I'll try and repeat the question if we don't catch it on the microphone, although Jodie is going to run. And so any questions?
Yeah, Sasha Alexander from SCEM, academic. I want to offer a constructive comment as a sort of icebreaker to the question time. Was looking at something like entrepreneurship, for example. It's part of the nomenclature in the survey, but it could mean different things to different people. So I was seeking to propose maybe the consideration of what it could mean. For example, to one staff member, it could mean entrepreneurship is raising international student numbers from 14 to 20%. For someone else would be a representation on a professional body. For someone else would be the solar car and creating meaningful trajectories for students, but also staff. For another staff member, it could be a will or work integrated learning project within a school that creates other trajectories and other enthusiasm. So, and for others, it will be a ready project that brings either above load remuneration or within load rewards and status. So it was just a comment to say, well, if it is entrepreneurship, where is it? And if we have a lot of it, could all the other staff get to know more about it, because they could possibly engage in one of those in-school or across university entrepreneurship ventures?
Thanks for the comment. It's a very valid comment. I think it could apply to not a lot, but a number of items in the My Voice survey which are arguably open to a bit of broad interpretation. And in some cases, I think people are not quite sure how to interpret something like entrepreneurship in their particular context, which may, in fact, indicate a negative, favourable response. So I think we ought to be careful in interpreting results like that. I think there are many very clear indicators which we can respond to, and I've spoken about those. Entrepreneurship is one that is low across the board. It's up a little bit in this survey, but still low. Cross-unit collaboration or cooperation is often another that's open to a bit of interpretation. You've got to look within the category, and the one I focus on really is communication and whether we have effective communication. So I think we've got to be a little careful. It's a point well made. Other questions? Bijan. Bijan, just wait for the microphone so that the people that are on live stream can hear you.
Yep. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. And I'm a bit disappointed we don't have 3 times the number here, because it was
well, they might be live streamed in.
Maybe, hopefully. Yes. Just one comment on the processes you mentioned, and I think you highlighted that the processes, people are not happy because of it relates to the process of change, and change sometimes is hard and difficult.
In part.
Yeah. But I would like to say that that's probably a very small part, because most of us as academics, change is not too difficult. We need to be leaders of change. But I still think after 5 years in this place, we have a lot of red tape and delays and difficulties with our processes. And when I highlight them, the answer given to me is always more or less implied or indirectly or directly that we need to ensure quality control. So in the name of quality control, we sometimes take things 3 to 5 times longer than it needs be, in my opinion. And I don't think doing something fast and swift and focused, it doesn't necessarily have to be bad quality to do with it. I'd like you to seriously look at some point I believe you appointed a red taping committee or some sort.
No, it existed before I started.
I think that committee still has to look at some of our processes. Some common sense issues that does not need this kind of, I think Graduate School of Research is one example that is so difficult and prolonged, the process of PhD submitting a thesis. It has to take about 9 months to graduate and then another 3 months to be scheduled for the next ceremony. And some of these things probably can be done a lot more faster. And my comment is that some of these disappointments impact on everything else. When I'm unhappy with GRS, then I say it's a problem with DVC, research and innovation. Then in turn, it's a problem with the VC, and it goes up the scale. So I think some of these interrelated issues, if we solve some of the major ones, hopefully it will fix some other ones in the process.
Thanks, Bijan. And the point's well made. We have maintained the red tape task force, and I know Paul's here and did a wonderful job on that for some time after it was formed to try and get rid of some of the low-hanging fruit in terms of red tape that we could dispense with. I think we've made progress. Large organisations, and we are a large organisation, tend to become more bureaucratic, and that leads to stifling to a certain extent of innovation and creativity in the way we'd like it in terms of responsiveness. What I'm very confident about is the people working across a range of our areas who need to respond to those sorts of issues are very open to those issues being raised and to trying to address them. So part of the process, I'm sure, going forward from here will be, again, a concerted effort to identify processes that we could either do away with or could manage more effectively. We're rolling out a new research management system over the next year or so. So this is a big issue for us to upgrade our sort of internal system to a major new research management system. We hope that will lead to some real changes for researchers. So point well made, Bijan. Other questions? We got any online ones? Oh, sorry, yeah.
Real quick, couple questions. One is, are you considering the use of agile teams to really atomatize each individual issue with a focused team of 6 or less?
We're certainly, it's a good point in terms of the, if you like, the process we want to put in place. I know we're worried about processes, so adding them into what we're doing may not sound like the best strategy. And we do want to be agile about it. And I think I made the comment that after the 2012 results, there was a concerted campaign, small groups addressing key issues to develop recommendations and then following through on action. I think we have to replicate that to some extent in this case, and I'll leave that with HR to begin to tease out the process, and we welcome suggestions from people about the most effective way to do it. What you'll see more of immediately is the senior executive group particularly engaging with academic colleagues around the university. Do we have anything online, Jody, do you know? No, nothing online. Okay, let's hope someone online will make comment. Anything else? Any other questions? Yes, up here.
Hi, I'm Lisa Coldbeck from ITDS. I just wondered, with all the projects that we have going on, you have a lot of property ones, but I'm thinking more of the ones to do with staff and process improvements and things like that. For one, do you think that we measure the benefits realisation? Do we do that well at the moment and kind of get what we expected at the beginning? And how could we possibly improve that going forward?
That's a very good question. one of the things that will come out of the post-implementation review of shared services is benefit realisation, at least at this stage. It's not just about where have we got gaps and challenges we have to try and address, but it's equally, are there benefits emerging? And then over time, how can we continue to realise those benefits? And so certainly in the context of shared services, there's an ongoing commitment to monitor that the ambition of the shared services program is actually going to be delivered. And if it doesn't, we need to review how we can address that. I think one of the things that the survey illustrates to me, amongst many things, but one thing in particular, as an area that we didn't get right during the development of the shared services program, is engaging sufficiently with academic colleagues about the impact shared services were going to have on academics in a range of ways. And I think in hindsight, we're reflecting on that now. This survey's come in a timely way to give us an opportunity to engage with people about that, amongst other things, which we will. So, but it's a good point about benefit realisation in general. If I take that, ITDS is a good example. Kerry Hollings isn't here today, but when you see the My Voice results for ITDS, they are extremely good. High levels of satisfaction from the team working. It's a big team in ITDS. It's a very positive set of results. So people very committed to those very big projects underway in terms of our virtual infrastructure and the difference it can make. But nevertheless, we need to ensure that the new systems we're rolling out, whether it's Ellucian to replace Callista, whether it's a new research management system, whether it's a new Wi-Fi system rolled out, whether it's the effectiveness, for example, of our collaborative learning spaces. I think we've reflected on the Peter Shergold building with Liverpool. We're thinking now again about how do we learn from that with Bankstown. So I think there's a continuous reflection on benefit and where we don't see it. I know it's highly contentious around academic workspaces, for example, in those new buildings. We are listening in relation to that. I think we've made some progress with Liverpool, but I'm sure the conversation with our colleagues around Bankstown will be, again, intense as we identify further changes we need to make. Any other? Sorry, yes, here. We just need to bring that mic over. Thanks, Jody.
My name is Shrapan Saha from School of Computing Engineering and Mathematics. I'm also the chair of the workload committee for the school. My observation from the school is level B and C carries a lot of teaching workload, and that's why the research affects. So therefore, there is a correlation. They are not satisfied because B and C are carrying heavy teaching load, and as a result, their research is suffering. So they are all interrelated.
They are interrelated, and you raise a good point. Level B and C, and to a certain extent level D colleagues are saying, and they have said, this is not necessarily something coming through this survey as an immediate realisation. I think we recognise the workload our colleagues at those levels, academic levels, are carrying. It's not just significant teaching loads, it's often academic leadership in various ways, whether they're directors of academic programs or course advisors or have other responsibilities. And they are often in a particular phase of their research career where they need to publish high quality output and win or participate in research grants. The pressures, I think, are manifest in that regard, and that's reflected in the survey. So two immediate responses. One, we are committed to working some of those issues through in the current restructure process, academic restructure process, and Sharon's working through that, and we have some recommendations in the white paper, so I'd refer people to that in terms of particular things we want to do. And secondly, of course, fundamentally there's a resourcing issue here for us, like there is for any institution. And if I go back to my comments about Western growth and our dependence on the Commonwealth, we do need to diversify our revenue streams, we do need to build our corpus, we do need to have greater sources of revenue through investment earnings to invest in teaching and research. And I think one of the very positive things that came out of the recent strategy day with the Board of Trustees, the board unanimously felt that we needed to begin to plan greater investment in teaching and research from those returns on our corpus sooner than we had anticipated. So a willingness to take more risk in order to move the university forward more rapidly. So that's something we're working through with the Board of Trustees at the moment. But resourcing issues are fundamental to that question. And when you are the most highly dependent university in the country on Commonwealth funding, there is a vulnerability. And we've seen that at this institution for a long time. We're moving through it, and I think that there are very many positive things to comment upon. I'm not for a moment wanting to play down the 2-year funding freeze, but we will emerge from it. Whether it's with the Labor government reintroducing the demand-driven system as they've promised, whether growth can be recognised, or whether it's as the current government's indicating, it will allow growth from 2020. They will deliver more resources. Other questions? Rugby.
How do you measure our university's impact on the citizens of
It's a good question. I think there are many ways we do it. Right at the moment, in the decadal planning exercise, we've been looking at a whole range of data about our professional programs as one example of that. We provide a significant amount of the workforce of this region, whether it's teachers or social workers or doctors or lawyers or accountants, and the list goes on. We are, by far and away, the biggest provider of the nurses and midwives for Western Sydney, much more broadly than that, but very much for our region. Our graduates are having a profound impact on this region. One of the things we need to think about as an institution, to take the question further and think about the impact in the future, economically we contribute about 1.2% of the gross regional product of Western Sydney. That may sound small, it's actually very significant. We're a major contributor to the economy of our region. The Liverpool campus contributes $54 million a year, estimated, into the Liverpool CBD in terms of the contribution from staff and students and our existence in a new facility. So we make a significant economic contribution. We make a significant contribution in terms of the workforce of the region. But as the region, through the Greater Sydney Commission's planning for the future of the 3 cities, the Parkland City, the Centre and the Eastern Sydney, we're going to have to look at what programs we need to develop to meet the future needs. So one of the other conversations we're having with the Board of Trustees, apart from decadal planning, let's start thinking about this in more detail, but it's also to say, well, how do we position ourselves in relation to the new airport and the sorts of high-tech jobs that will be required there? How do we position ourselves in those key areas like health, for example, where health service delivery will become one of the biggest growth parts of the economy in the future? How do we position ourselves in relation to arts and culture and the contribution we make there, which is immense? And we're doing work on that as well. And then there's the whole technology overlay. So I think the contribution is significant. And as I mentioned, the GOA are putting out a new report on their economic contribution to Australia to try and swing the dial. I don't think there are many politicians I encounter of any political persuasion who don't see Western Sydney University as an incredibly important part of this region and wanting to ensure our success. Policies change and political positions change, but there's no, in my view, there's no diminishing of the commitment of those politicians to the importance of Western Sydney University. So any other questions? Okay, nothing online? Okay, so thank you to the online audience as well as those here. Thank you very much. All the material, as I said, will be available. There'll also be detailed conversations at school and division level, so many opportunities to engage, and I look forward to your feedback, and thank you very, very much for participating today. Thank you.